everyone. I'm Apostle Dr. Leanne Marino, and this is the Word of Power brought to you by Apostolic Fellowship International Ministries. Today we're addressing the question, was Mary Magdalene a prostitute? When I was young, I attended a church that espoused that belief that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. We were told that she was a temptress, a woman of sin, and after her repentance to Christianity, went out into the desert to live a tormented and sacrificial life of suffering. Because I knew little about the scriptures at the time, I simply accepted this version of Mary Magdalene's life as a fact. So imagine my surprise to learn this version of Mary Magdalene's life is both false and completely without historical backing. It should not shock any of us to learn that such a fabrication was born out of a bad spirit, and we shall discuss that in a minute. But what do the scriptures tell us about Mary Magdalene? Do they indicate she was a prostitute? The Bible tells us very little about Mary Magdalene's life. There is one obvious thing that makes her notable. Mary is known from the city where she was from. She was Mary from Magdala, rather than being known by her father's name. This automatically means that there was something special about Mary Magdalene, something that went against convention. We have no biblical or historical evidence, however, that Mary Magdalene was ever a prostitute. What does the Bible tell us about Mary Magdalene? Something entirely different from the prostitution story indeed. Let's look at John 20, verses 10 through 18 for some clarity on who Mary Magdalene was. Then the disciples went back to their homes, but Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. "Woman," he said, "why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet returned to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am returning to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them that he had said these things to her. In studying this passage, we can see Mary Magdalene was greatly grieved by the death of Jesus and stayed with him, even staying long after others had left, weeping at his tomb. Mary Magdalene was the first person to have an experience with the resurrected Christ. Rather than cling to Christ resurrected, she was sent directly by him, having the revelation of his resurrection, to go and tell the rest of the disciples, including the men, that Christ was not dead but alive. She went, having been sent by Christ, to proclaim the good news to the others. In studying the biblical criteria to be an apostle, Mary Magdalene meets the criteria to be an apostle, the first female apostle, in fact. She had an experience with the resurrected Christ. She was called to bear a message, given that instruction directly by Christ himself, and she was sent to go out with that message, pointing all to Christ, not to herself or a denominational body. This is a far cry from being a prostitute who spent her last days in misery, suffering, and pain in the wilderness. What good would it do anyway when there is a gospel to be preached? The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, a formerly lost apocryphal gospel from the early history of Christianity, confirms Mary Magdalene's role as an apostle and early church leader, leading a good portion of the early Christian church. While only fragments of this gospel have been found, they present a powerful, flowing confirmation of the work begun in Mary Magdalene at the empty tomb as established by Christ. Rather than confirming the religious notion that Mary Magdalene is the ultimate bad girl turned sadistically repentant, we can see Mary holding a relevant and vital role in the early church. This is relevant not just for her day, but for ours as well. It proves that God has never intended for a woman to have a subordinate church role, and it also affirms that women are active participants called to carry the gospel to all nations as well as men. The story of Mary Magdalene as a prostitute began with Pope Gregory in the 6th century. We don't know exactly how he came to his conclusion, but knowing the papacy as I do, I'm sure it wasn't with a good motive. Even before that, early church leaders staunchly condemned the gospel of Mary Magdalene because they couldn't fathom God would put a woman in such authority, and that really is the sole reason why they contended the gospel. Even now, this notion ravages its way through the church. And it is most appropriate that in the last days, where God is calling women to rise up and take their place, following in the footsteps of Mary Magdalene, that such a document disproving thousands of years of sexism would arise to uncover all the wrong notions many have about women. Mary Magdalene has become the ultimate symbol in the battle between men and women, that women need to be subjugated in the church by order of God. What we fail to remember is that the battle of the sexes was null on the cross, and Jesus' words to Mary Magdalene, establishing her authority and office as an apostle, and any battle that might exist. If we come to look at Mary Magdalene in a proper light, we can come to view all women properly as according to the Scriptures, loved of God, chosen by Him, and sent to do any work He may ordain for them throughout their lives. Thank you very much for joining me on the broadcast today. We welcome comments, questions, suggestions. Maybe one of your questions will be chosen for a future broadcast. Send them to letters@powerfortoday.org, and be sure to visit me on my website at www.powerfortoday.org for more information on this ministry and on the great work God is doing in women all around the world. Thank you very much for joining me, and until next time, be blessed.